Today we're going to talk about all literary translation, talk about these four people and how they got involved in literary translation, different experiences they've had, obstacles, the whole deal. And just to tell you what the format is, I'm going to introduce everyone, ask them each a few specific and somewhat more general questions, and hope that they all interact with one another and talk. If anywhere along the way, and especially at the end, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I want it to be a real conversation between people. So starting out, to my immediate left is Michael Emmerich, who, has a very interesting story. He actually, when he was an undergraduate, translated the Nobel Prize-winning author Kawabata's first Snow on Fiji, which was published by Counterpoint Press in 1999. He's since gone on to translate dozens of novels and articles because his CV is unbelievable, including the works by Banana Yoshimoto. He's currently both a postdoctoral fellow in the Society of Fellows at Princeton University and an assistant professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Now, to his left is Martha Tennent, who's lived most of her life in Barcelona, where she was the founding dean of the School of Translation and Interpreting at the University of Vic. She has regularly translated between Spanish, Catalan, and English, including various screenplays for television, films, and series, and including a feature film. She's also edited Training for the New Millennium, Pedagogies for Translation and Interpreting, and she's currently translating Merce Rodereda's Death in Spring for Open Letter, which will publish next spring in May. Then to her left is Edward Gauvin, who translates children's graphic novels for first, second books, and an ongoing comic series for Archaea Studios Press. In 2007, he was awarded a fellowship to attend the American Literary Translators Association, also referred to as ALTA, which will come up later. And this past summer, he was in residency at the Banff International Literary Translation Center, where he was able to pursue further work on fabulous Georges-Olivier Chateau-Renaud. Then to his left is Marian Schwartz, who is a past president of ALTA and is one of the top Russian translators of our time. She was the principal English translator of the works of Nina Berberova and recently retranslated Mikhail Bulgakov's The White Guard and Ivan Goncharov's Oblomov. Over her career, she has received a number of prizes, including 2 translation fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts. And I want to thank all of you guys for coming. It's wonderful to have you here. So one of the things that always interests me in talking to translators is I have this theory that they all have very strange ways that you end up becoming translators, that it's not like a direct path always. So I want to ask each one of you, as I get to you, how you got started in translation. And I want to start with you, Marian, because there's some questions.
I started in translation in graduate school. I went to undergraduate at Harvard, and then I went to University of Texas for my master's. And I discovered there that it was full of people who had fled Harvard, which was completely inhospitable to anything having to do with literature at that time, and barely talked about the 20th century, to a place that was just full of ferment. We had amazing people there. Paul Schmidt was there, John Bolt was there, Charlotte Douglas was there, Sidney Monis, Mike Heim had just been there. It was quite an exciting place, and all those people were translating some of the most exciting literature of the early 20th century in Russian literature, and they were doing in various genres. They were doing film, art, cultural history. So it was very exciting, and it was the thing that everyone was doing. So I actually started at that point. As far as a career path, I must say that up until I was maybe 28 or maybe 25, I didn't actually believe in the future. So I didn't have a career path. I just sort of did what seemed like a good idea at the time. I really had no faith that there was going to be a future. So I didn't plan anything. So I started translating then. I did a translation with one of my professors, another fine translator, Dick Sylvester, who taught at Colgate for many years. And then after I got my master's, I went to New York. I was going to work in publishing. And I worked as an editor at a small publishing house, which I consider a wonderful thing for translators to do. I think translators need to understand publishing better than they do, to understand how a book gets made, how a book gets budgeted, what the process is. It was a small house. I learned how to do everything. And there was somebody there who knew somebody who needed a Russian translator. And they said, could you do it? I had no credentials. And they had me doing a book, probably the most important work of philosophy in the 20th century in Russia, had not been translated. And I had no idea that it hadn't been translated. And so I, as only somebody that young can do, I translated something I had no business, with a lot of help. with a lot of advice and experts helping me. So my first book came out, shortly after moving to New York. So that's how I started.
So now with the recent retranslations that you've done, I think you've done more than the two I referenced too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. The first one is like, who's originating that project in these cases? Is it the publisher coming to you and asking for a new translation, or are you interested in retranslating these? And whichever way it goes, what's the quality that makes you feel like this book needs to be retranslated and should be available in a new version?
Not just retranslations, but in all the years I've been doing this for 30 years, only one book has ever been published at my initiative. And it took almost the full 30 years to get it published, to find a publisher for it. It has always ultimately been the publisher who has asked me to do it, and it's almost pathological. The New York publishers want to do these translations. It's like a sure bet. Aren't there, I can't tell you how many, I have the exact same conversation with editors from Modern Library, I don't know, different places, big houses, saying, isn't there something that we still want to do? Isn't there, how about a new Fathers and Sons? How about a new, because it's free, free to the author, no author to pay, and there's a textbook market for it. So that's often, I did it, the first one I did was A Hero of Our Time, Lermontov's Hero of Our Time, which actually needed a new translation, but mine will never sell because the translation that everybody buys is the one by Nabokov, which is worth buying just for the footnotes. Just for the footnotes. No, if you think Pale Fire is funny, you should read Nabokov's footnotes to Hero of Our Time. They're a stitch, in which he explains absolutely every joke that could possibly be in there. And he chastises Lermontov for using a bad word or losing a plot line or something. And so I did that one. The person who's doing classics in a really wonderful way is Evan Frank at York Review Books. And what I often do for him is he'll say, here's a book that I think has been neglected. Look at the old translations, and he'll have me do reports and compare the existing translations. And sometimes I'll say, there's a good one. There was one that I said, it was interesting because it was a translation of something, a 19th century novel, the Golubyov family, and the translation was a translation no one would do now. It was a completely old-fashioned style. But it had such a voice, and it was so convincing. It was Natalie Duddington, who's a good translator. And I said, nobody would ever do it this way anymore. But this is a good translation. And he put that out. But then he had, I did Envy for him. So I did those two in addition to the Oblomov and the Weingart. But all of them came from other people. None of them were my idea.
Okay. Is it true with you guys too? Have most of your projects been publisher started or initiated, or do you guys bring the projects to the publishers?
Mine have definitely been virtually all publisher initiated. Really with the manuscript I was working on at BAMF this summer, it's the first time that I've ever tried to go the other way. And we'll see how it goes.
I know I brought Death in Spring to you, so.
Well, yes, and other, short stories. I haven't translated nearly as much as the other three, but some of it, a couple of things, I initiated, and others, it was a project that was ongoing that, I was contacted by, the publishers.
That's not true for stories, though. It's just
right,
for novels,
right,
just for
right,
books.
right.
It's publishers, yeah.
I've had two works that I did on my own, but one was my senior thesis, and so I had sort of gotten what I needed to get out of it at that point, and it happened to be by a Nobel Prize winner, and Nobel Prize winners you can do something with. The second time I did that was with a book called, in English, Sayonara Gangsters, which is my all-time favorite. I know I will never translate another book that I like as much as this book. And I got some of the nicest rejection letters. I know I'm going to kick myself later for this, but for 3 years. And then finally,